Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Two Brothers. There were once upon a time 2 brothers, one rich and the other poor. The rich one was a goldsmith and evil-hearted. The poor one supported himself by making brooms and was good and honorable. The poor one had 2 children who were twin brothers and as like each other as 2 drops of water. The 2 boys went backwards and forwards to the rich house and often got some of the scraps to eat. It happened once, when the poor man was going into the forest to fetch brushwood, that he saw a bird which was quite golden and more beautiful than any he had ever chanced to meet with. He picked up a small stone, threw it at him, and was lucky enough to hit him. But one golden feather only fell down, and the bird flew away. The man took the feather and carried it to his brother, who looked at it and said, "It is pure gold," and gave him a great deal of money for it. Next day the man climbed into a birch tree and was about to cut off a couple of branches when the same bird flew out. And when the man searched, he found a nest, and an egg lay inside it, which was of gold. He took the egg home with him and carried it to his brother, who again said, "It is pure gold," and gave him what it was worth. At last the goldsmith said, "I should indeed like to have the bird itself." The poor man went into the forest for the 3rd time, and again saw the golden bird sitting on the tree. So he took a stone and brought it down and carried it to his brother, who gave him a great heap of gold for it. "Now I can get on," thought he, and went contentedly home. The goldsmith was crafty and cunning, and knew very well what kind of a bird it was. He called his wife and said, "Roast me the gold bird, and take care that none of it is lost. I have a fancy to eat it all myself." The bird, however, was no common one, but of so wondrous a kind that whosoever ate its heart and liver found every morning a piece of gold beneath his pillow. The woman made the bird ready, put it on the spit, and let it roast. Now it happened that while it was at the fire, and the woman was forced to go out of the kitchen on account of some other work, the 2 children of the poor broom maker ran in, stood by the spit, and turned it round once or twice. And as at that very moment 2 little bits of the bird fell down into the dripping tin, one of the boys said, "We will eat these 2 little bits. I am so hungry, and no one will ever miss them." Then the 2 ate the pieces, but the woman came into the kitchen and saw that they were eating something and said, "What have ye been eating?" "2 little morsels, which fell out of the bird," answered they. "That must have been the heart and the liver," said the woman, quite frightened. And in order that her husband might not miss them and be angry, she quickly killed a young cock, took out his heart and liver, and put them beside the golden bird. When it was ready, she carried it to the goldsmith, who consumed it all alone, and left none of it. Next morning, however, when he felt beneath his pillow and expected to bring out the piece of gold, no more gold pieces were there than there had always been. The 2 children did not know what a piece of good fortune had fallen to their lot. Next morning when they arose, something fell rattling to the ground, and when they picked it up, there were 2 gold pieces. They took them to their father, who was astonished and said, "How can that have happened?" When next morning they again found 2, and so on daily, he went to his brother and told him the strange story. The goldsmith at once knew how it had come to pass, and that the children had eaten the heart and liver of the golden bird, and in order to revenge himself, and because he was envious and hard-hearted, he said to the father, "Thy children are in league with the evil one. Do not take the gold, and do not suffer them to stay any longer in thy house, for he has them in his power, and may ruin thee likewise." The father feared the evil one, and painful as it was to him, he nevertheless led the twins forth into the forest, and with a sad heart left them there. And now the 2 children ran about the forest, and sought the way home again, but could not find it, and only lost themselves more and more. At length they met with a huntsman, who asked, "To whom do you children belong?" "We are the poor broom-maker's boys," they replied, and they told him that their father would not keep them any longer in the house, because a piece of gold lay every morning under their pillows. "Come," said the huntsman, "that is nothing so very bad, if at the same time you keep honest and are not idle." As the good man liked the children and had none of his own, he took them home with him and said, "I will be your father, and bring you up till you are big." They learnt huntsmanship from him, and the piece of gold which each of them found when he awoke was kept for them by him in case they should need it in the future. When they were grown up, their foster father one day took them into the forest with him and said, "Today shall you make your trial shot, so that I may release you from your apprenticeship and make you huntsmen." They went with him to lie in wait and stayed there a long time, but no game appeared. The huntsman, however, looked above him and saw a covey of wild geese flying in the form of a triangle, and said to one of them, "Shoot me down one from each corner." He did it, and thus accomplished his trial shot. Soon after, another covey came flying by in the form of the figure 2, and the huntsman bade the other also bring down one from each corner, and his trial shot was likewise successful. "Now," said the foster father, "I pronounce you out of your apprenticeship. You are skilled huntsmen." Thereupon the 2 brothers went forth together into the forest, and took counsel with each other and planned something. And in the evening, when they had sat down to supper, they said to their foster father, "We will not touch food or take one mouthful until you have granted us a request." Said he, "What then is your request?" They replied, "We have now finished learning, and we must prove ourselves in the world, so allow us to go away and travel." Then spake the old man joyfully, "You talk like brave huntsmen. That which you desire has been my wish. Go forth, all will go well with you." Thereupon they ate and drank joyously together. When the appointed day came, their foster father presented each of them with a good gun and a dog, and let each of them take as many of his saved-up gold pieces as he chose. Then he accompanied them a part of the way, and when taking leave, he gave them a bright knife, and said, "If ever you separate, stick this knife into a tree at the place where you part, and when one of you goes back, he will be able to see how his absent brother is faring, for the side of the knife, which is turned in the direction by which he went, will rust if he dies, but will remain bright as long as he is alive." The 2 brothers went still farther onwards, and came to a forest which was so large that it was impossible for them to get out of it in one day. So they passed the night in it, and ate what they had put in their hunting pouches. But they walked all the second day likewise, and still did not get out. As they had nothing to eat, one of them said, "We must shoot something for ourselves, or we shall suffer from hunger," and loaded his gun and looked about him. And when an old hare came running up towards them, he laid his gun on his shoulder. But the hare cried, "Dear huntsman, do but let me live. 2 little ones to thee I'll give," and sprang instantly into the thicket and brought 2 young ones. But the little creatures played so merrily and were so pretty that the huntsmen could not find it in their hearts to kill them. They therefore kept them with them, and the little hares followed on foot. Soon after this, a fox crept past. They were just going to shoot it, but the fox cried, "Dear huntsman, do but let me live. 2 little ones I'll also give." He, too, brought 2 little foxes, and the huntsman did not like to kill them either, but gave them to the hares for company, and they followed behind. It was not long before a wolf strode out of the thicket. The huntsman made ready to shoot him, but the wolf cried, "Dear huntsman, do but let me live. 2 little ones I'll likewise give." The huntsman put the 2 wolves beside the other animals, and they followed behind them. Then a bear came, who wanted to trot about a little longer and cried, "Dear huntsman, do but let me live. 2 little ones I too will give." The 2 young bears were added to the others, and there were already 8 of them. At length, who came? A lion came, and tossed his mane. But the huntsmen did not let themselves be frightened, and aimed at him likewise. But the lion also said, "Dear huntsman, do but let me live. 2 little ones I too will give." And he brought his little ones to them, and now the huntsman had 2 lions, 2 bears, 2 wolves, 2 foxes, and 2 hares, who followed them and served them. In the meantime, their hunger was not appeased by this. And they said to the foxes, "Hark ye, cunning fellows, provide us with something to eat. You are crafty and deep." They replied, "Not far from here lies a village, from which we have already brought many a fowl. We will show you the way there." So they went into the village, bought themselves something to eat, had some food given to their beasts, and then traveled onwards. The foxes, however, knew their way very well about the district and where the poultry yards were, and were able to guide the huntsmen. Now they traveled about for a while, but could find no situations where they could remain together. So they said, "There is nothing else for it. We must part." They divided the animals so that each of them had a lion, a bear, a wolf, a fox, and a hare. Then they took leave of each other, promised to love each other like brothers till their death, and stuck the knife which their foster father had given them into a tree, after which one went east and the other went west. The younger, however, arrived with his beasts in a town which was all hung with black crape. He went into an inn and asked the host if he could accommodate his animals. The innkeeper gave him a stable where there was a hole in the wall, and the hare crept out and fetched himself the head of a cabbage, and the fox fetched himself a hen. And when he had devoured that, got the cock as well, but the wolf, the bear, and the lion could not get out because they were too big. Then the innkeeper let them be taken to a place where a cow was just then lying on the grass, that they might eat till they were satisfied. And when the huntsman had taken care of his animals, he asked the innkeeper why the town was thus hung with black crape. Said the host, "Because our king's only daughter is to die tomorrow." The huntsman inquired if she was sick unto death. "No," answered the host, "she is vigorous and healthy, Nevertheless, she must die." "How is that?" asked the huntsman. "There is a high hill without the town, whereon dwells a dragon who every year must have a pure virgin, or he lays the whole country waste, and now all the maidens have already been given to him, and there is no longer anyone left but the king's daughter. Yet there is no mercy for her. She must be given up to him, and that is to be done tomorrow." Said the huntsman, "Why is the dragon not killed?" "Ah," replied the host, "so many knights have tried it, but it has cost all of them their lives. The king has promised that he who conquers the dragon shall have his daughter to wife, and shall likewise govern the kingdom after his own death." The huntsman said nothing more to this, but next morning took his animals, and with them ascended the dragon's hill. A little church stood at the top of it, and on the altar 3 full cups were standing, with the inscription, "Whosoever empties the cups will become the strongest man on earth, and will be able to wield the sword which is buried before the threshold of the door." The huntsman did not drink, but went out and sought for the sword in the ground, but was unable to move it from its place. Then he went in and emptied the cups, and now he was strong enough to take up the sword, and his hand could quite easily wield it. When the hour came, when the maiden was to be delivered over to the dragon, the king, the marshal, and courtiers accompanied her. From afar she saw the huntsman on the dragon's hill, and thought it was the dragon standing there waiting for her, and did not want to go up to him. But at last, because otherwise the whole town would have been destroyed, she was forced to go the miserable journey. The king and courtiers returned home full of grief. The king's marshal, however, was to stand still and see all from a distance. When the king's daughter got to the top of the hill, it was not the dragon which stood there, but the young huntsman, who comforted her and said he would save her, led her into the church and locked her in. It was not long before the 7-headed dragon came thither with loud roaring. When he perceived the huntsman, he was astonished and said, "What business hast thou here on the hill?" The huntsman answered, "I want to fight with thee." Said the dragon, "Many knights have left their lives here. I shall soon have made an end of thee too." And he breathed fire out of 7 jaws. The fire was to have lighted the dry grass, and the huntsman was to have been suffocated in the heat and smoke, but the animals came running up and trampled out the fire. Then the dragon rushed upon the huntsman, but he swung his sword until it sang through the air and struck off 3 of his heads. Then the dragon grew right furious and rose up in the air and spat out flames of fire over the huntsman and was about to plunge down on him, but the huntsman once more drew out his sword and again cut off 3 of his heads. The monster became faint and sank down. Nevertheless, it was just able to rush upon the huntsman, but he with his last strength smote its tail off, and as he could fight no longer, called up his animals who tore it in pieces. When the struggle was ended, the huntsman unlocked the church and found the king's daughter lying on the floor, as she had lost her senses with anguish and terror during the contest. He carried her out, and when she came to herself once more and opened her eyes, he showed her the dragon all cut to pieces, and told her that she was now delivered. She rejoiced and said, "Now thou wilt be my dearest husband, for my father has promised me to him who kills the dragon." Thereupon she took off her necklace of coral and divided it amongst the animals in order to reward them, and the lion received the golden clasp. Her pocket handkerchief, however, on which was her name, she gave to the huntsman, who went and cut the tongues out of the dragon's 7 heads, wrapped them in the handkerchief, and preserved them carefully. That done, as he was so faint and weary with the fire and the battle, he said to the maiden, "We are both faint and weary. We will sleep a while." Then she said, "Yes." And they lay down on the ground, and the huntsman said to the lion, "Thou shalt keep watch, that no one surprises us in our sleep." And both fell asleep. The lion lay down beside them to watch, but he also was so weary with the fight that he called to the bear and said, "Lie down near me. I must sleep a little. If anything comes, waken me." Then the bear lay down beside him, but he also was tired, and called the wolf and said, "Lie down by me. I must sleep a little, but if anything comes, waken me." Then the wolf lay down by him, but he was tired likewise, and called the fox and said, "Lie down by me. I must sleep a little. If anything comes, waken me." Then the fox lay down beside him, but he too was weary, and called the hare and said, "Lie down near me. I must sleep a little, and if anything should come, waken me." Then the hare sat down by him, but the poor hare was tired too, and had no one whom he could call there to keep watch, and fell asleep. And now the king's daughter, the huntsman, the lion, the bear, the wolf, the fox, and the hare were all sleeping a sound sleep. The marshal, however, who was to look on from a distance, took courage when he did not see the dragon flying away with the maiden, and finding that all the hill had become quiet, ascended it. There lay the dragon hacked and hewn to pieces on the ground, and not far from it were the king's daughter and a huntsman with his animals, and all of them were sunk in a sound sleep. And as he was wicked and godless, he took his sword, cut off the huntsman's head, and seized the maiden in his arms, and carried her down the hill. Then she awoke and was terrified, but the marshal said, "Thou art in my hands. Thou shalt say that it was I who killed the dragon." "I cannot do that," she replied, "for it was a huntsman with his animals who did it." Then he drew his sword and threatened to kill her if she did not obey him, and so compelled her that she promised it. Then he took her to the king, who did not know how to contain himself for joy when he once more looked on his dear child in life, whom he had believed to have been torn to pieces by the monster. The marshal said to him, "I have killed the dragon and delivered the maiden and the whole kingdom as well. Therefore I demand her as my wife, as was promised." The king said to the maiden, "Is what he says true?" "Ah, yes," she answered. "It must indeed be true, but I will not consent to have the wedding celebrated until after a year and a day." For she thought in that time she should hear something of her dear huntsman. The animals, however, were still lying, sleeping beside their dead master on the dragon's hill, and there came a great humble bee and lighted on the hare's nose, but the hare wiped it off with his paw and went on sleeping. The humble bee came a second time, but the hare again rubbed it off and slept on. Then it came for the third time, and stung his nose so that he awoke. As soon as the hare was awake, he roused the fox, and the fox the wolf, and the wolf the bear, and the bear the lion. And when the lion awoke and saw that the maiden was gone and his master was dead, he began to roar frightfully and cried, "Who has done that? Bear, why didst thou not waken me?" The bear asked the wolf, "Why didst thou not waken me?" And the wolf the fox, "Why didst thou not waken me?" And the fox the hare, "Why didst thou not waken me?" The poor hare alone did not know what answer to make, and the blame rested with him. Then they were just going to fall upon him, but he entreated them and said, "Kill me not, I will bring our master to life again. I know a mountain on which a root grows, which, when placed in the mouth of anyone, cures him of all illness and every wound. But the mountain lies 200 hours' journey from here." The lion said, "In 24 hours must thou have run thither, and have come back, and have brought the root with thee." Then the hare sprang away, and in 24 hours he was back, and brought the root with him. The lion put the huntsman's head on again, and the hare placed the root in his mouth, and immediately everything united together again, and his heart beat, and life came back. Then the huntsman awoke, and was alarmed when he did not see the maiden, and thought, "She must have gone away whilst I was sleeping, in order to get rid of me." The lion in his great haste had put his master's head on the wrong way round, but the huntsman did not observe it because of his melancholy thoughts about the king's daughter. But at noon, when he was going to eat something, he saw that his head was turned backwards and could not understand it, and asked the animals what had happened to him in his sleep. Then the lion told him that they, too, had all fallen asleep from weariness, and on awaking had found him dead with his head cut off, that the hare had brought the life-giving root, and that he, in his haste, had laid hold of the head the wrong way, but that he would repair his mistake. Then he tore the huntsman's head off again, turned it round, and the hare healed it with the root. The huntsman, however, was sad at heart, and traveled about the world, and made his animals dance before people. It came to pass that precisely at the end of 1 year, he came back to the same town, where he had delivered the king's daughter from the dragon, and this time the town was gaily hung with red cloth. Then he said to the host, "What does this mean? Last year the town was all hung with black crape. What means the red cloth today?" The host answered, "Last year our king's daughter was to have been delivered over to the dragon, but the marshal fought with it and killed it, and so tomorrow their wedding is to be solemnized, and that is why the town was then hung with black crape for mourning, and is today covered with red cloth for joy." Next day, when the wedding was to take place, the huntsman said at midday to the innkeeper, "Do you believe, Sir Host, that I while with you here today shall eat bread from the king's own table?" "Nay," said the host, "I would bet 100 pieces of gold that that will not come true." The huntsman accepted the wager and set against it a purse with just the same number of gold pieces. Then he called the hare and said, "Go, my dear runner, and fetch me some of the bread which the king is eating." Now the little hare was the lowest of the animals, and could not transfer this order to any of the others, but had to get on his legs himself. "Alas," thought he, "if I bound through the streets thus alone, the butcher's dogs will all be after me." It happened as he expected, and the dogs came after him and wanted to make holes in his good skin. But he sprang away. Have you never seen one running? And sheltered himself in a sentry box without the soldier being aware of it. Then the dogs came and wanted to have him out, but the soldier did not understand a jest, and struck them with the butt end of his gun, till they ran away yelling and howling. As soon as the hare saw that the way was clear, he ran into the palace and straight to the king's daughter, sat down under her chair, and scratched at her foot. Then she said, "Wilt thou get away?" and thought it was her dog. The hare scratched her foot for the second time, and she again said, "Wilt thou get away?" and thought it was her dog. But the hare did not let itself be turned from its purpose, and scratched her for the third time. Then she peeped down, and knew the hare by its collar. She took him on her lap, carried him into her chamber, and said, "Dear hare, what dost thou want?" He answered, "My master, who killed the dragon, is here, and has sent me to ask for a loaf of bread like that which the king eats." Then she was full of joy, and had the baker summoned, and ordered him to bring a loaf such as was eaten by the king. The little hare said, "But the baker must likewise carry it thither for me, that the butcher's dogs may do no harm to me." The baker carried it for him as far as the door of the inn, and then the hare got on his hind legs, took the loaf in his front paws, and carried it to his master. Then said the huntsman, "Behold, Sir Host, the 100 pieces of gold are mine." The host was astonished, but the huntsman went on to say, "Yes, Sir Host, I have the bread, but now I will likewise have some of the king's roast meat." The host said, "I should indeed like to see that." But he would make no more wagers. The huntsman called the fox and said, "My little fox, go and fetch me some roast meat, such as the king eats." The red fox knew the byways better, and went by holes and corners without any dog seeing him, seated himself under the chair of the king's daughter, and scratched her foot. Then she looked down and recognized the fox by its collar, took him into her chamber with her, and said, "Dear fox, what dost thou want?" He answered, "My master, who killed the dragon, is here, and has sent me. I am to ask for some roast meat such as the king is eating." Then she made the cook come, who was obliged to prepare a roast joint, the same as was eaten by the king, and to carry it for the fox as far as the door. Then the fox took the dish, waved away with his tail the flies which had settled on the meat, and then carried it to his master. "Behold, Sir Host," said the huntsman, "bread and meat are here, but now I will also have proper vegetables with it, such as are eaten by the king." Then he called the wolf and said, "Dear wolf, go thither and fetch me vegetables such as the king eats." Then the wolf went straight to the palace, as he feared no one, and when he got to the king's daughter's chamber, he twitched at the back of her dress, so that she was forced to look round. She recognized him by his collar, and took him into her chamber with her, and said, "Dear wolf, what dost thou want?" He answered, "My master, who killed the dragon, is here. I am to ask for some vegetables, such as the king eats." So then she made the cook come, and he had to make ready a dish of vegetables such as the king ate, and had to carry it for the wolf as far as the door. And then the wolf took the dish from him, and carried it to his master. "Behold, Sir Host," said the huntsman, "now I have bread and meat and vegetables, but I will also have some pastry to eat like that which the king eats." He called the bear and said, "Dear bear, thou art fond of licking anything sweet. Go and bring me some confectionery, such as the king eats." Then the bear trotted to the palace, and everyone got out of his way. But when he went to the guard, they presented their muskets, and would not let him go into the royal palace. But he got up on his hind legs, and gave them a few boxes on the ears, right and left, with his paws, so that the whole watch broke up. And then he went straight to the king's daughter, placed himself behind her, and growled a little. Then she looked behind her, knew the bear, and bade him go into her room with her, and said, "Dear bear, what dost thou want?" He answered, "My master, who killed the dragon, is here, and I am to ask for some confectionery, such as the king eats." Then she summoned her confectioner, who had to bake confectionery such as the king ate, and carry it to the door for the bear. Then the bear first licked up the comfits which had rolled down, and then he stood upright, took the dish, and carried it to his master. "Behold, Sir Host," said the huntsman, "now I have bread, meat, vegetables, and confectionery, but I will drink wine also, and such as the king drinks." He called his lion to him and said, "Dear lion, thou thyself likest to drink till thou art intoxicated. Go and fetch me some wine, such as is drunk by the king." Then the lion strode through the streets, and the people fled from him. And when he came to the watch, they wanted to bar the way against him. But he did but roar once, and they all ran away. Then the lion went to the royal apartment, and knocked at the door with his tail. Then the king's daughter came forth, and was almost afraid of the lion, but she knew him by the golden clasp of her necklace, and bade him go with her into her chamber, and said, "Dear lion, what wilt thou have?" He answered, "My master, who killed the dragon, is here, and I am to ask for some wine such as is drunk by the king." Then she bade the cupbearer be called, who was to give the lion some wine like that which was drunk by the king. The lion said, "I will go with him, and see that I get the right wine." Then he went down with the cupbearer, and when they were below, the cupbearer wanted to draw him some of the common wine that was drunk by the king's servants. But the lion said, "Stop, I will taste the wine first." And he drew half a measure and swallowed it down at one draught. "No," said he, "that is not right." The cupbearer looked at him askance, but went on, and was about to give him some out of another barrel, which was for the king's marshal. The lion said, "Stop, let me taste the wine first," and drew half a measure and drank it. "That is better, but still not right," said he. Then the cupbearer grew angry and said, "How can a stupid animal like you understand wine?" But the lion gave him a blow behind the ears, which made him fall down by no means gently. And when he had got up again, he conducted the lion quite silently into a little cellar apart, where the king's wine lay, from which no one ever drank. The lion first drew half a measure and tried the wine, and then he said, "That may possibly be the right sort," and bade the cupbearer fill 6 bottles of it. And now they went upstairs again. But when the lion came out of the cellar into the open air, he reeled here and there, and was rather drunk. And the cupbearer was forced to carry the wine as far as the door for him. And then the lion took the handle of the basket in his mouth, and took it to his master. The huntsman said, "Behold, Sir Host, here have I bread, meat, vegetables, confectionery, and wine such as the king has, and now I will dine with my animals." And he sat down and ate and drank, and gave the hare, the fox, the wolf, the bear, and the lion also to eat and to drink, and was joyful, for he saw that the king's daughter still loved him. And when he had finished his dinner, he said, "Sir Host, now have I eaten and drunk, as the king eats and drinks, and now I will go to the king's court, and marry the king's daughter." Said the host, "How can that be, when she already has a betrothed husband, and when the wedding is to be solemnized today?" Then the huntsman drew forth the handkerchief which the king's daughter had given him on the dragon's hill, and in which were folded the monster's 7 tongues, and said, "That which I hold in my hand shall help me to do it." Then the innkeeper looked at the handkerchief, and said, "Whatever I believe, I do not believe that, and I am willing to stake my house and courtyard on it." The huntsman, however, took a bag with 1,000 gold pieces, put it on the table, and said, "I stake that on it." Now the king said to his daughter, at the royal table, "What did all the wild animals want, which have been coming to thee, and going in and out of my palace?" She replied, "I may not tell you, but send and have the master of these animals brought, and you will do well." The king sent a servant to the inn and invited the stranger, and the servant came just as the huntsman had laid his wager with the innkeeper. Then said he, "Behold, sir host, now the king sends his servant and invites me, but I do not go in this way." And he said to the servant, "I request the Lord King to send me royal clothing, and a carriage with 6 horses, and servants to attend me." When the king heard the answer, he said to his daughter, "What shall I do?" She said, "Cause him to be fetched as he desires to be, and you will do well." Then the king sent royal apparel, a carriage with 6 horses, and servants to wait on him. When the huntsman saw them coming, he said, "Behold, sir host, now I am fetched as I desired to be." And he put on the royal garments, took the handkerchief with the dragon's tongues with him, and drove off to the king. When the king saw him coming, he said to his daughter, "How shall I receive him?" She answered, "Go to meet him, and you will do well." Then the king went to meet him and led him in, and his animals followed. The king gave him a seat near himself and his daughter, and the marshal, as bridegroom, sat on the other side, but no longer knew the huntsman. And now, at this very moment, the 7 heads of the dragon were brought in as a spectacle, and the king said, "The 7 heads were cut off the dragon by the marshal, wherefore today I give him my daughter to wife." The huntsman stood up, opened the 7 mouths, and said, "Where are the 7 tongues of the dragon?" Then was the marshal terrified, and grew pale, and knew not what answer he should make, and at length in his anguish he said, "Dragons have no tongues." Lo, the huntsman said, "Liars ought to have none, but the dragon's tongues are the tokens of the victor." And he unfolded the handkerchief, and there lay all 7 inside it. And he put each tongue in the mouth to which it belonged, and it fitted exactly. Then he took the handkerchief on which the name of the princess was embroidered, and showed it to the maiden, and asked to whom she had given it. And she replied, "To him who killed the dragon." And then he called his animals, and took the collar off each of them and the golden clasp from the lion, and showed them to the maiden, and asked to whom they belonged. She answered, "The necklace and golden clasp were mine, but I divided them among the animals who helped to conquer the dragon." Then spake the huntsman, "When I, tired with the fight, was resting and sleeping, the marshal came and cut off my head. Then he carried away the king's daughter, and gave out that it was he who had killed the dragon. But that he lied, I prove with the tongues, the handkerchief, and the necklace." And then he related how his animals had healed him by means of a wonderful root, and how he had traveled about with them for 1 year, and had at length again come there, and had learnt the treachery of the marshal by the innkeeper's story. Then the king asked his daughter, "Is it true that this man killed the dragon?" And she answered, "Yes, it is true. Now can I reveal the wicked deed of the marshal, as it has come to light without my connivance, for he wrung from me a promise to be silent. For this reason, however, did I make the condition that the marriage should not be solemnized for 1 year and a day." Then the king bade 12 counselors be summoned, who were to pronounce judgment on the marshal, and they sentenced him to be torn to pieces by 4 bulls. The marshal was therefore executed, But the king gave his daughter to the huntsman and named him his viceroy over the whole kingdom. The wedding was celebrated with great joy, and the young king caused his father and his foster father to be brought, and loaded them with treasures. Neither did he forget the innkeeper, but sent for him and said, "Behold, Sir Host, I have married the king's daughter, and your house and yard are mine." The host said, "Yes, according to justice it is so." But the young king said, "It shall be done according to mercy," and told him that he should keep his house and yard, and gave him the 1,000 pieces of gold as well. And now the young king and queen were thoroughly happy and lived in gladness together. He often went out hunting because it was a delight to him, and the faithful animals had to accompany him. In the neighborhood, however, there was a forest of which it was reported that it was haunted, and that whosoever did but enter it did not easily get out again. The young king, however, had a great inclination to hunt in it, and let the old king have no peace until he allowed him to do so. So he rode forth with a great following, and when he came to the forest, he saw a snow-white hart, and said to his people, "Wait here until I return. I want to chase that beautiful creature." And he rode into the forest after it, followed only by his animals. The attendants halted and waited until evening, but he did not return. So they rode home, and told the young queen that the young king had followed a white hart into the enchanted forest, and had not come back again. Then she was in the greatest concern about him. He, however, had still continued to ride on and on after the beautiful wild animal, and had never been able to overtake it. When he thought he was near enough to aim, he instantly saw it bound away into the far distance, and at length it vanished altogether. And now he perceived that he had penetrated deep into the forest, and blew his horn, but he received no answer, for his attendants could not hear it. And as night, too, was falling, he saw that he could not get home that day. So he dismounted from his horse, lighted himself a fire near a tree, and resolved to spend the night by it. While he was sitting by the fire, and his animals also were lying down beside him, it seemed to him that he heard a human voice. He looked round, but could perceive nothing. Soon afterwards he again heard a groan as if from above, and then he looked up and saw an old woman sitting in the tree, who wailed unceasingly. "Oh, oh, oh, how cold I am!" "Ing," said he, "come down and warm thyself if thou art cold." But she said, "No, thy animals will bite me." He answered, "They will do thee no harm, old mother. Do come down." She, however, was a witch, and said, "I will throw down a wand from the tree, and if thou strikest them on the back with it, they will do me no harm." Then she threw him a small wand, and he struck them with it, and instantly they lay still, and were turned into stone. And when the witch was safe from the animals, she leapt down and touched him also with a wand, and changed him to stone. Thereupon she laughed, and dragged him and the animals into a vault, where many more such stones already lay. As, however, the young king did not come back at all, the queen's anguish and care grew constantly greater. And it so happened that at this very time, the other brother who had turned to the east when they separated came into the kingdom. He had sought a situation and had found none, and had then traveled about here and there, and had made his animals dance. Then it came into his mind that he would just go and look at the knife that they had thrust in the trunk of a tree at their parting, that he might learn how his brother was. When he got there, his brother's side of the knife was half rusted and half bright. Then he was alarmed and thought, "A great misfortune must have befallen my brother, but perhaps I can still save him, for half the knife is still bright." He and his animals traveled towards the west, and when he entered the gate of the town, the guard came to meet him and asked if he was to announce him to his consort, the young queen, who had for a couple of days been in the greatest sorrow about his staying away, and was afraid he had been killed in the enchanted forest. The sentries, indeed, thought no otherwise than that he was the young king himself, for he looked so like him and had wild animals running behind him. Then he saw that they were speaking of his brother, and thought, "It will be better if I pass myself off for him, and then I can rescue him more easily." So he allowed himself to be escorted into the castle by the guard, and was received with the greatest joy. The young queen indeed thought that he was her husband, and asked him why he had stayed away so long. He answered, "I had lost myself in a forest, and could not find my way out again any sooner. At night he was taken to the royal bed, but he laid a two-edged sword between him and the young queen. She did not know what that could mean, but did not venture to ask. He remained in the palace a couple of days, and in the meantime inquired into everything which related to the enchanted forest, and at last he said, "I must hunt there once more." The king and the young queen wanted to persuade him not to do it, but he stood out against them and went forth with a larger following. When he had got into the forest, it fared with him as with his brother. He saw a white hart and said to his people, "Stay here and wait until I return. I want to chase the lovely wild beast." And then he rode into the forest, and his animals ran after him. But he could not overtake the hart, and got so deep into the forest that he was forced to pass the night there. And when he had lighted a fire, he heard someone wailing above him, "Oh, oh, oh, how cold I am!" Lo, then he looked up, and the self-same witch was sitting in the tree. Said he, "If thou art cold, come down, little old mother, and warm thyself." She answered, "No, thy animals will bite me." But he said, "They will not hurt thee." Then she cried, "I will throw down a wand to thee, and if thou smitest them with it, they will do me no harm." When the huntsman heard that, he had no confidence in the old woman, and said, "I will not strike my animals. Come down, or I will fetch thee." Then she cried, "What dost thou want? Thou shalt not touch me." But he replied, "If thou dost not come, I will shoot thee." Said she, "Shoot away, I do not fear thy bullets." Then he aimed and fired at her, but the witch was proof against all leaden bullets, and laughed and yelled and cried, "Thou shalt not hit me." The huntsman knew what to do, tore 3 silver buttons off his coat, and loaded his gun with them, for against them her arts were useless, and when he fired, she fell down at once with a scream. Then he set his foot on her and said, "Old witch, if thou dost not instantly confess where my brother is, I will seize thee with both my hands and throw thee into the fire." She was in a great fright, begged for mercy, and said, "He and his animals lie in a vault, turned to stone." Then he compelled her to go thither with him, threatened her, and said, "Old sea cat, now shalt thou make my brother and all the human beings lying here alive again, or thou shalt go into the fire." She took a wand and touched the stones, and then his brother with his animals came to life again. And many others, merchants, artisans, and shepherds, arose, thanked him for their deliverance, and went to their homes. But when the twin brothers saw each other again, they kissed each other and rejoiced with all their hearts. Then they seized the witch, bound her, and laid her on the fire. And when she was burnt, the forest opened of its own accord, and was light and clear, and the king's palace could be seen at about the distance of a 3 hours' walk. Thereupon the 2 brothers went home together, and on the way told each other their histories. And when the youngest said that he was ruler of the whole country in the king's stead, the other observed, "That I remarked very well, for when I came to the town and was taken for thee, all royal honors were paid me. The young queen looked on me as her husband, and I had to eat at her side and sleep in thy bed." When the other heard that, he became so jealous and angry that he drew his sword and struck off his brother's head. But when he saw him lying there dead, and saw his red blood flowing, he repented most violently. "My brother delivered me," cried he, "and I have killed him for it." And he bewailed him aloud. Then his hare came and offered to go and bring some of the root of life, and bound it away and brought it while yet there was time. And the dead man was brought to life again, and knew nothing about the wound. After this they journeyed onwards, and the youngest said, "Thou lookest like me, hast royal apparel on as I have, and the animals follow thee as they do me. We will go in by opposite gates, and arrive at the same time from the 2 sides in the aged king's presence." So they separated, and at the same time came the watchmen from the one door and from the other, and announced that the young king and the animals had returned from the chase. The king said, "It is not possible. The gates lie quite a mile apart." In the meantime, however, the 2 brothers entered the courtyard of the palace from opposite sides, and both mounted the steps. Then the king said to the daughter, "Say which is thy husband. Each of them looks exactly like the other, I cannot tell." Then she was in great distress and could not tell. But at last she remembered the necklace which she had given to the animals, and she sought for and found her little golden clasp on the lion, and she cried in her delight, "He who is followed by this lion is my true husband." Then the young king laughed and said, "Yes, he is the right one." And they sat down together to table, and ate and drank, and were merry. At night when the young king went to bed, his wife said, "Why hast thou for these last nights always laid a 2-edged sword in our bed? I thought thou hadst a wish to kill me." Then he knew how true his brother had been. The King of the Golden Mountain. There was a certain merchant who had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were both young and could not walk. And 2 richly laden ships of his sailed forth to sea with all his property on board. And just as he was expecting to win much money by them, news came that they had gone to the bottom. And now, instead of being a rich man, he was a poor one, and had nothing left but one field outside the town. In order to drive his misfortune a little out of his thoughts, he went out to this field. And as he was walking forwards and backwards in it, a little black mannikin stood suddenly by his side and asked why he was so sad and what he was taking so much to heart. Then said the merchant, "If thou couldst help me, I would willingly tell thee." "Who knows?" replied the black dwarf. "Perhaps I can help thee." Then the merchant told him that all he possessed had gone to the bottom of the sea, and that he had nothing left but this field. "Do not trouble thyself," said the dwarf. "If thou wilt promise to give me the first thing that rubs itself against thy leg when thou art at home again, and to bring it here to this place in 12 years' time, thou shalt have as much money as thou wilt." The merchant thought, "What can that be but my dog?" and did not remember his little boy. So he said yes, gave the black man a written and sealed promise, and went home. When he reached home, his little boy was so delighted that he held by a bench, tottered up to him, and seized him fast by the legs. The father was shocked, for he remembered his promise, and now knew what he had pledged himself to do. As, however, he still found no money in his chest, he thought the dwarf had only been jesting. A month afterwards he went up to the garret, intending to gather together some old tin and to sell it, and saw a great heap of money lying. Then he was happy again, made purchases, became a greater merchant than before, and felt that this world was well governed. In the meantime, the boy grew tall, and at the same time sharp and clever. But the nearer the 12th year approached, the more anxious grew the merchant, so that his distress might be seen in his face. One day his son asked what ailed him, but the father would not say. The boy, however, persisted so long that at last he told him that without being aware of what he was doing, he had promised him to a black dwarf, and had received much money for doing so. He said likewise that he had set his hand and seal to this, and that now, when 12 years had gone by, he would have to give him up. Then said the son, "O father, do not be uneasy. All will go well. The black man has no power over me." The son had himself blessed by the priest, and when the time came, father and son went together to the field, and the son made a circle and placed himself inside it with his father. Then came the black dwarf and said to the old man, "Hast thou brought with thee that which thou hast promised me?" He was silent, but the son asked, "What dost thou want here?" Then said the black dwarf, "I have to speak with thy father, and not with thee." The son replied, "Thou hast betrayed and misled my father. Give back the writing." "No," said the black dwarf, "I will not give up my rights." They spoke together for a long time after this, but at last they agreed that the son, as he did not belong to the enemy of mankind, nor yet to his father, should seat himself in a small boat which should lie on water which was flowing away from them, and that the father should push it off with his own foot, and then the son should remain given up to the water. So he took leave of his father, placed himself in a little boat, and the father had to push it off with his own foot. The boat capsized so that the keel was uppermost, and the father believed his son was lost, and went home and mourned for him. The boat, however, did not sink, but floated quietly away, and the boy sat safely inside it, and it floated thus for a long time, until at last it stopped by an unknown shore. Then he landed, and saw a beautiful castle before him, and set out to go to it. But when he entered it, he found that it was bewitched. He went through every room, but all were empty until he reached the last, where a snake lay coiled in a ring. The snake, however, was an enchanted maiden, who rejoiced to see him, and said, "Hast thou come, O my deliverer? I have already waited 12 years for thee. This kingdom is bewitched, and thou must set it free." "How can I do that?" he inquired. "Tonight come 12 black men, covered with chains, who will ask what thou art doing here. Keep silent, give them no answer, and let them do what they will with thee. They will torment thee, beat thee, stab thee. Let everything pass, only do not speak. At 12 o'clock they must go away again. On the second night 12 others will come. On the third, 24, who will cut off thy head. But at 12 o'clock their power will be over. And then, if thou hast endured all, and hast not spoken the slightest word, I shall be released. I will come to thee, and will have, in a bottle, some of the water of life. I will rub thee with that, and then thou wilt come to life again, and be as healthy as before. Then said he, I will gladly set thee free. And everything happened just as she had said. The black men could not force a single word from him. And on the third night the snake became a beautiful princess, who came with the water of life and brought him back to life again. So she threw herself into his arms and kissed him, and there was joy and gladness in the whole castle. After this, their marriage was celebrated, and he was king of the Golden Mountain. They lived very happily together, and the queen bore a fine boy. 8 years had already gone by, when the king bethought him of his father. His heart was moved, and he wished to visit him. The queen, however, would not let him go away, and said, I know beforehand that it will cause my unhappiness. But he suffered her to have no rest until she consented. At their parting, she gave him a wishing ring, and said, Take this ring, and put it on thy finger, and then thou wilt immediately be transported whithersoever thou wouldst be, only thou must promise me not to use it in wishing me away from this place and with thy father. That he promised her, put the ring on his finger, and wished himself at home, just outside the town where his father lived. Instantly he found himself there, and made for the town. But when he came to the gate, the sentries would not let him in, because he wore such strange and yet such rich and magnificent clothing. Then he went to a hill where a shepherd was watching his sheep, changed clothes with him, put on his old shepherd's coat, and then entered the town without hindrance. When he came to his father, he made himself known to him, but he did not at all believe that the shepherd was his son, and said he certainly had had a son, but that he was dead long ago. However, as he saw he was a poor, needy shepherd, he would give him something to eat. Then the shepherd said to his parents, I am verily your son. Do you know of no mark on my body by which you could recognize me? Yes, said his mother. Our son had a raspberry mark under his right arm. He slipped back his shirt, and they saw the raspberry under his right arm, and no longer doubted that he was their son. Then he told them that he was king of the Golden Mountain, and a king's daughter was his wife, and that they had a fine son of 7 years old. Then said the father, That is certainly not true. It is a fine kind of a king who goes about in a ragged shepherd's coat. On this the son fell in a passion, and without thinking of his promise, turned his ring round, and wished both his wife and child with him. They were there in a second, but the queen wept and reproached him, and said that he had broken his word, and had brought misfortune upon her. He said, I have done it thoughtlessly, and not with evil intention, and tried to calm her, and she pretended to believe this, but she had mischief in her mind. Then he led her out of the town into the field, and showed her the stream where the little boat had been pushed off. And then he said, I am tired. Sit down. I will sleep a while on thy lap. And he laid his head on her lap, and fell asleep. When he was asleep, she first drew the ring from his finger. Then she drew away the foot which was under him, leaving only the slipper behind her. And she took her child in her arms, and wished herself back in her own kingdom. When he awoke, there he lay quite deserted, and his wife and child were gone, and so was the ring from his finger. The slipper only was still there, as a token. Home to thy parents thou canst not return, thought he. They would say that thou wast a wizard. Thou must be off, and walk on until thou arrivest in thine own kingdom. So he went away, and came at length to a hill by which 3 giants were standing, disputing with each other because they did not know how to divide their father's property. When they saw him passing by, they called to him and said little men had quick wits, and that he was to divide their inheritance for them. The inheritance, however, consisted of a sword, which had this property that if anyone took it in his hand and said, "All heads off but mine," every head would lie on the ground. Secondly, of a cloak which made anyone who put it on invisible. Thirdly, of a pair of boots which could transport the wearer to any place he wished in a moment. He said, "Give me the 3 things that I may see, if they are still in good condition." They gave him the cloak, and when he had put it on, he was invisible and changed into a fly. Then he resumed his own form and said, "The cloak is a good one. Now give me the sword." They said, "No, we will not give thee that. If thou were to say, 'All heads off but mine,' all our heads would be off, and thou alone wouldst be left with thine." Nevertheless, they gave it to him with the condition that he was only to try it against a tree. This he did, and the sword cut in 2 the trunk of a tree, as if it had been a blade of straw. Then he wanted to have the boots likewise, but they said, "No, we will not give them. If thou hadst them on thy feet and wert to wish thyself at the top of the hill, we should be left down here with nothing." "Oh no," said he, "I will not do that." So they gave him the boots as well. And now, when he had got all these things, he thought of nothing but his wife and his child, and said as though to himself, "Oh, if I were but on the golden mountain." And at the same moment he vanished from the sight of the giants, and thus their inheritance was divided. When he was near his palace, he heard sounds of joy, and fiddles, and flutes, and the people told him that his wife was celebrating her wedding with another. Then he fell into a rage, and said, "False woman, she betrayed and deserted me whilst I was asleep." So he put on his cloak, and unseen by all went into the palace. When he entered the dining hall, a great table was spread with delicious food, and the guests were eating and drinking and laughing and jesting. She sat on a royal seat in the midst of them in splendid apparel, with a crown on her head. He placed himself behind her, and no one saw him. When she put a piece of meat on a plate for herself, he took it away and ate it, and when she poured out a glass of wine for herself, he took it away and drank it. She was always helping herself to something, and yet she never got anything, for plate and glass disappeared immediately. Then, dismayed and ashamed, she arose and went to her chamber and wept, but he followed her there. She said, "Has the devil power over me, or did my deliverer never come?" Then he struck her in the face and said, "Did thy deliverer never come? It is he who has thee in his power, thou traitor. Have I deserved this from thee?" Then he made himself visible, went into the hall and cried, "The wedding is at an end. The true king has returned." The kings, princes, and counselors who were assembled there ridiculed and mocked him, but he did not trouble to answer them, and said, "Will you go away or not?" On this they tried to seize him and pressed upon him, but he drew his sword and said, "All heads off but mine." And all the heads rolled on the ground, and he alone was master, and once more king of the Golden Mountain. The 12 Apostles. Long, long ago, In the days when kings still rode to battle in shining armor, and angels were said to walk unseen among men, there lived a poor woman in a lonely valley at the edge of a dark forest. Her cottage was made of rough stones gathered from the hill, and its roof was so thin that the rain crept through in winter and the sun burned through in summer. Yet in that humble home she had brought into the world 12 sons, 12 sturdy boys with bright eyes and hungry mouths. And though her heart was as rich in love as any queen's, her purse was empty, and her bread grew smaller each day. When the last crumb was gone, and her tears had wet the cradle boards, she knelt upon the cold earthen floor and prayed, "O Lord of heaven, who feeds the birds in their nests and clothes the lilies of the field, let not my children perish. Let them live to see the promised Redeemer, who shall walk upon this earth. Let them be among his servants when he comes." But the days only grew harder. The neighbors had nothing to spare. The well ran dry, and the wild beasts came nearer each night. So the poor mother in her grief sent forth her sons, one after another, into the world to seek bread. "Go, my child," she said to each, "and may the good God guide thy steps. If thou findest mercy among men, remember thy brothers and thy mother who prays for thee without rest." The eldest was named Peter, and he went out first. He walked from dawn until the stars rose, yet found neither food nor shelter. At last he came into a vast forest where the trees grew so close that not even a single beam of moonlight could find its way between them. All around him the wind sighed and the wolves howled. Peter wandered until his strength failed him, for his stomach was empty and his feet were torn by stones. When his eyes grew dim and the chill of death crept into his limbs, he sank down beneath a fir tree and whispered, "Lord, let me but see thy face before I die." Then all at once a soft radiance broke through the shadows, and there stood before him a small boy, no taller than a shepherd's staff. His face shone as if the morning star had taken flesh, and his garments were white as snow, newly fallen. The child clapped his hands gently, and the sound rang clear like silver bells, so that Peter lifted his head and beheld him in wonder. "Why dost thou sit here in sorrow, poor pilgrim?" asked the shining boy, his voice like a song half spoken, half sung. "Alas," answered Peter, "I have gone into the world to seek bread for my brothers and my mother, that I may yet live to see the blessed Savior who is promised. That is all I wish before I die." "Come with me," said the radiant child, smiling. "Thy wish shall be fulfilled." He took Peter by the hand, his small fingers warm and strong, and led him through the forest. The way twisted among cliffs and hidden roots until they came to a cleft in the rock. There the angel, for such he was, struck the stone with his palm, and a door opened silently as if the mountain itself had bowed. Within was a cavern filled with a light softer than gold and brighter than crystal. Jewels glimmered from the walls like stars, and in the center of the hall stood 12 cradles, each made of shining metal, some of silver, some of purest gold, some of crystal clear as frozen water. "Lie down in the first cradle and sleep," said the angel. "I will sing thee a song, and thou shalt rest." So Peter obeyed, and when his head touched the pillow, the child began to sing. The tune was strange and gentle, like the murmuring of distant seas. And before the second verse was done, Peter's eyes closed and his heart grew quiet as the snow in the forest. But the story does not end there. For soon afterward, another brother, John, wandered the same road, hungry and lost. His guardian angel guided him by the same path of light, and he too was brought to the cavern and laid in the second cradle beside Peter. Then came the third, and the fourth, and so one by one, through hunger, faith, and the mercy of heaven, all 12 sons found their way to the golden hall. The angels sang over each in turn, rocking them with hands that never tired, until the 12 brothers lay side by side, asleep in a circle of light. And there they slept, not for a night, nor for a season, but for 300 years. The forest grew over the entrance, moss covered the rocks, kingdoms rose and fell, and the names of men were forgotten. Yet still they lay at rest, untouched by time, their faces calm as though dreaming of the dawn to come. Then, on the night when the Savior of the world was born in Bethlehem, a great light filled the cavern. The rocks trembled as if rejoicing, the gold gleamed like morning sun, and one by one the 12 sleepers awoke. Their eyes opened together, and they heard the sound of distant angels singing, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace." They rose from their cradles, clothed now not in rags but in garments white as the lilies of paradise. The angel who had watched them all those ages smiled and said, "Go forth, ye children of faith, the time has come. He whom ye desired to see walks now among men." And so they went out into the world, 12 humble men whose hearts burned with the love of God. They followed the Redeemer in his wanderings. They saw his miracles, they heard his words, and they carried his light to the ends of the earth. For those 12 poor brothers, once hungry and forgotten, became known to all generations as the 12 apostles. The sleepers awakened, the sons of faith fulfilled. The soul. Long ago, when the waters of river and lake still shimmered with untouched clarity, the fishes were not at peace with one another. Great disorder reigned in their kingdom beneath the waves, for each creature swam as it pleased, and none thought of yielding place to its neighbor. One glided to the right, another to the left. A third broke rudely between those who wished to keep together, and a fourth thrust itself forward into every narrow passage. The strong scorned the weak, striking them aside with cruel tales, or, if hunger came upon them, swallowing them in silence and without a thought. So it happened that murmurs spread through the waters. The little fishes whispered, the middling ones grumbled, and even the great and ancient carp raised his solemn head from the mud to complain. "It cannot go on so," said they one to another. "We live without order, without law, without justice. We are a people, yet no people. How delightful it would be if among us there were a king, one who could set the haughty in their place, shield the weak, and see that all swam in peace." When these words had been spoken often, the fishes grew bold and resolved to act. A great gathering was called at the shore, where reeds stood thick and dragonflies danced in the evening air. From far and wide they came, the sleek herring from the cold sea, the gudgeon from the brook, the perch with his red fins, the carp with his golden scales, the sharp-toothed pike who was feared by all, and even the flat and silent sole who usually lay hidden on the sandy bed. There they assembled in rows, as soldiers might do before a battle. The waves hushed as if listening, and the sun shone down like a watchful eye. Then the pike, whose strength none doubted, lifted his mighty tail and struck the water with a clap like a whip. "Let the race begin," cried all the fishes, and with that they darted forward. Like arrows loosed from many bows they sped. The pike shot first, his jaws open, his body gleaming. After him the herring flashed, the perch beat his fins furiously, the carp heaved his heavy bulk, and the gudgeon scurried with all the swiftness his small frame allowed. Even the sole roused himself, though sluggish and slow by nature, and dreamed of surprising them all by cunning. For a time they kept together, and the water churned as though a storm had risen. But little by little, one fell behind, another veered aside, a third lost breath. The carp, weary of his own weight, sank lower and lower. The perch grew tired of his endless fluttering. Only the herring pressed on, light and tireless, his silver sides flashing in the sun. Then a cry rang out across the water. "The herring is first! The herring has outstripped them all!" Now the sole, who lay far behind, heard these words and burned with envy. He turned his flat face upward and cried, "Who is first? Who dares to be first before me?" "The herring! The herring!" shouted all the fishes. "What? The naked herring!" screamed the sole, for spiteful was his heart. "Shall such a bare, unarmored creature wear the crown of the waters?" His cry was so bitter and so full of malice that the very waves echoed it. And from that day forth, the mouth of the sole was drawn awry, twisted to one side as if forever sneering at his neighbor. It was given to him as a punishment, so that all who look upon him may know what comes of envy and ill will. For though the fishes had sought a king to rule with justice, discord sprang up once more among them, and to this very hour the kingdom of the waters has never been free of quarrel. The Owl. 200 or 300 years ago, when men and women still lived in simpler ways, and when craftiness and clever tricks were not so common as they are today, there occurred a most curious happening in a small town, ringed about with fields, orchards, and dark woods. It was a town where every villager knew his neighbor's footsteps, and where the tolling of the bell at dawn and dusk was the surest guide of time. One night, while the moon stood high above the gables and the watchman still called the hours, a strange visitor came from the shadowy forest. It was a horned owl, a great solemn bird, wide of wing, heavy of feather, with eyes like glowing embers. By mischance or by restless wandering, the owl had flown into the barn of a certain townsman, and once there, as daylight crept into the sky, she dared not fly back out. For in daylight all the smaller birds, who fear and hate the owl, would have raised such a clamoring mob against her that she might never have escaped alive. So she settled herself on a dark beam in the loft and waited, silent and still, her round eyes rolling in her head. In the morning, the master's servant went into the barn to fetch straw for the cattle, but as soon as his gaze fell on the motionless figure in the corner, his heart nearly leapt from his chest. He thought he beheld not a bird, but some dreadful monster from out of fairy tales, a beast with vast staring eyes, large enough to swallow a man at a gulp. With cries of terror, he threw down his fork, ran from the place, and stammered to his master that an unspeakable creature crouched in the barn, rolling its eyes and waiting to devour whomever came near. The master laughed at first, for he knew his servant to be a timid fellow, bold enough to chase sparrows in the field, but fearful even of a hen lying dead in the dust. "I must see this marvel myself," he said, and strode out with bravado. Yet when his own eyes beheld the grim shape upon the beam, his courage faltered, and his knees knocked together as though struck by winter's cold. With 2 leaps he was out of the barn again, his face pale, his breath sharp. At once he ran to the neighbors, crying that some wild and dangerous beast had crept into his barn, and that if it broke loose, the whole town might come to ruin. Word spread swiftly, for rumor has wings swifter than any owl, and soon the entire street rang with alarm. Housewives peered from windows, children were driven indoors, and men seized whatever weapons lay at hand. Spears left from old campaigns, scythes, hayforks, and axes. They gathered in a swarm, as if marching against an army. The senators of the town came as well, grave in their gowns, with the burgomaster at their head, for they feared this menace might become a public peril. When all were assembled in the marketplace, they drew up in order, then advanced with caution to the barn. They surrounded it as soldiers would an enemy fortress. Silence fell, broken only by the stamping of feet and the low murmur of prayers. At length, one courageous fellow stepped forward with his spear lowered. With measured breath, he entered the dark barn. But scarcely had he glimpsed the dreadful figure than he burst out again, white as chalk, shrieking and unable to form a word. Another tried, then a third, but each returned no braver than the last. Murmurs ran through the crowd, fear mounting like floodwater. Then came forth a great, strong man, famed in the town for his boldness and the blows he had struck in war. He scoffed at the others, calling them no better than frightened maidens. "You will not banish a monster with staring and sighs," said he. "Give me arms, and I will rid the town of this fiend." They brought him a stout sword and a strong spear, and he girded himself with armor as the people praised his valor, though many whispered that he would not leave the barn alive. The barn doors were thrown wide, all eyes turned upward, and there sat the owl, her feathers bristling, her eyes burning in the half-dark, perched on the great crossbeam. A ladder was brought, and the champion began to climb, step by step. The people cried to him to be brave, and commended him to St. George who slew the dragon. The air quivered with expectation, but the owl, frightened by the multitude and the gleam of steel, grew restless. She rolled her eyes, shook her wings, snapped her beak, and gave forth a harsh cry. "To it! To who?" The sound echoed so dreadfully that the hearts of all who heard it froze in their breasts. "Strike! Strike!" the people shouted to their hero. "Strike, say you?" cried he, trembling where he stood on the ladder. "Any man who stood where I now stand would not call so loudly for the blow." He raised one foot to the next rung, but his courage melted like wax before the fire. Pale and gasping, he climbed down again, and could not be persuaded to mount once more. Now terror seized the crowd. "The monster," they whispered, "has poisoned the bravest among us with a single cry. Its very breath strikes men down. Shall we all risk death?" None dared enter again. The senators and burgomaster took counsel. Long did they argue, while the people pressed around in fear. At last the burgomaster rose and spoke. "My judgment is this. Let us not endanger more lives. We will pay the owner of this barn from the town purse for all his straw, hay, and corn. Then we shall set fire to the building and consume the beast with it. Better to lose one barn than the whole town." The people, who had no wish to face the monster themselves, agreed at once. So they laid fire at the four corners of the barn. Flames rose high, crackling and roaring, and before long the whole building was swallowed by fire. And with it the poor owl, who might have flown free in the night, was miserably burned to ashes. And if any man doubt this tale, let him go to that town and inquire for himself, for the people there will tell him still of the terrible monster that once sat in a barn, and how the whole town was set in uproar over a poor horned owl. The 12 Idle Servants. There were once 12 servants, stout of body but weak of spirit, who spent the whole of their days in idleness. They never lifted a hand by daylight, and when evening came, instead of mending their faults, they stretched themselves on the grass and made a sport of boasting which among them was laziest. Each one told his tale of sloth, as though it were a badge of honor, and the night grew long with their vain-glorious confessions. The first raised his voice and said, "My laziness is greater than all yours, and I will tell you why. The chief business of my life is to tend my own belly. I eat 4 meals every day and drink enough to sink a ship, and after that I must lie still until hunger returns. To rise with the sun is not for me. Rather, I wait until the day is half spent, and then I look about for some soft corner to rest in. If my master calls, I pretend not to hear. If he calls again, I stir myself slowly, like a tortoise in winter, and creep to him only when it pleases me. Thus I keep my body whole, and in this fashion I endure life." The second, not to be outdone, spoke thus, "I am set to look after a horse, yet I scarcely trouble myself with his care. I let the bit rest in his mouth, and if I dislike the task, I simply give him no food, saying he has eaten already. Meanwhile, I climb into the oat chest and sleep 4 hours at a stretch. When I awake, I stretch out my foot and brush it once or twice across the horse's back, and that is my combing. Who would make a greater labor of it? Yet even so, the service is too toilsome for me." The third laughed and shook his head. "Work? Why plague oneself with it? One day I laid myself in the sun and fell asleep. A little rain began to fall, but I stirred not. Then the shower came down so hard it washed the very hair from my head, leaving a bare hole in my skull. Still, I did not rise. At last I set a plaster upon the wound and thought no more of it. I have suffered many such injuries, but never have they taught me diligence." The fourth folded his hands and said, "When work is given me, I first wander about an hour to save my strength. Then I begin as slowly as if time itself were endless, asking always if no one will lend me aid. If help comes, I let the other do the burden and stand looking on. Yet even standing by is too heavy for me." The fifth, yawning, added his part. "My lot is to clean the horse's stable and load the cart with dung. I take it up little by little, half raising it upon the fork, then resting for a quarter of an hour before I toss it in. If by day's end I have filled one cart, I count it more than enough. I was not born to kill myself with labor." Then spoke the sixth, half asleep. "You are children compared to me. I fear no work, that is true, yet I lie down 3 weeks at a time without removing my clothes. Shoes may fall from my feet for all I care. When I climb a stair, I drag one foot after the other onto the first step, then stop to count the rest, so I may know where next to rest. Such is my strength." The seventh boasted in a weak voice, "My master often looks to see if I labor, though he is gone much of the day. Still I neglect nothing save movement itself. I run as swiftly as can be done when one only crawls. To go forward, I need 4 sturdy men to push me with all their might. Once I came where 6 men lay sleeping on a bed. I lay beside them and slumbered too, and when they would wake me, they could not, and were forced to carry me home like a sack of grain." The eighth raised himself a little and said proudly, "Among you, I alone am truly diligent. When a stone lies in my path, I do not trouble to lift my legs. I lay myself upon the ground, though it be wet or muddy, and wait until the sun has dried me. At most I turn myself a little, that the warmth may strike another side. The ninth said with a feeble sigh, "That is true idleness indeed. Today bread lay before me, yet I had not the strength to take it, and nearly perished of hunger. A jug of drink was near, but it was large and heavy, and I preferred thirst to the trouble of lifting it. To turn myself round was more than I could endure, so I lay like a log from dawn till dusk." The 10th spoke with a groan. "My laziness has brought me misfortune, for I bear a broken leg and a swollen calf. 3 of us lay in the road, my legs stretched wide. A cart came rolling, and the wheels passed over me. I might have drawn my legs aside, but the midges buzzed about my ears and crept in at my nose and out at my mouth, and I could not take the trouble to drive them away. So now I suffer, yet I still lie idle." The 11th smirked. "I gave up my post but yesterday. I tired of carrying my master's books to and fro, without end. He dismissed me at last, for the garments I left lying in the dust became moth-eaten, and he would keep me no longer. Yet I rejoiced at my freedom, and counted it good fortune." Finally, the 12th told his tale. "This very day I was to drive the cart into the fields. I spread straw upon it and laid myself down to sleep. The reins slipped from my hand, and while I slumbered, the horse was nearly torn away, the harness stolen, the strap, the collar, the bridle, and bit, all carried off by some passer-by. The cart sank into a quagmire and stuck fast. Still, I did not stir. Only when the master himself came and set it free was the thing made right. Had he not come, I would still be there, stretched upon the straw, sleeping in tranquility." And so the 12 servants boasted of their sloth. Each thought himself the laziest, and each was proud of what should have brought him shame. Whether they remained long in their master's service, the tale does not say. But folk whispered that such men are more burdensome than beasts, for even an ox will pull the cart, and a hound will guard the door. But these 12 thought idleness the highest art. Lazy Harry. Harry was a lazy fellow, and though his one task in life was as simple as leading his goat to pasture each morning, he grumbled at the thought of it whenever the day's labor was done. He would sit upon the doorstep, rub his weary eyes, and murmur to himself in a voice that scarcely disguised his disgust. A heavy burden indeed, to walk a goat to the field day after day, from spring until late autumn. If only I could lie down and sleep for an hour or two, then perhaps the world would seem less grinding. But no, I must keep my eyes open, or the foolish creature will nibble the young saplings, squeeze through a gap in the hedge and find its way into some rich man's garden, or else run off into the woods and be lost altogether. Where is a man to find rest or peace of his life with such business to mind? He seated himself upon a low stone, folded his hands, and let his thoughts circle round and round like crows in the sky. For a long while his thinking brought him no comfort. His mind wandered and fell back into the same list of complaints. At last, as sometimes happens when one sits still too long and lets the wind settle in the trees, his eyes seemed to clear as though scales had slipped from them. "I know what I will do," he cried out suddenly, as a man who has found a key at the bottom of his pocket. "I will marry fat Trina, for she too keeps a goat. If her goat and my goat are driven together, The trouble will be doubled for one pair of hands, and thus halved for me. Then I shall be free of this daily burden." With that, Harry rose, set his reluctant legs in motion, and went straight across the lane. For her parents lived no farther than the next house, and asked for the hand of fat Trina. He praised her in few words. She was diligent, he said, and virtuous, which was true enough so far as laziness admits the existence of virtues in others. Her parents, who liked nothing better than to see plain folk make plain bargains, thought but little and quickly agreed. Birds of a feather flock together, they observed with a nod, and so the match was made. Fat Trina became Harry's wife, and the two of them began to lead out both goats each morning. Harry found himself with a lighter life and more leisure than before. Now his only toil was the maintenance of his own idleness. He would go out with Trina upon occasion, but only to show that he had been diligent. Then he would say with a complacent air, "I do this but that I might afterwards enjoy rest all the more. Otherwise, one loses the taste of it." Trina, for her part, proved no less fond of ease than her husband. She would stretch upon the bed after the goats were fed and sigh with content, for she had discovered that there are many kinds of work afoot and many ways to put them off. "Dear Harry," said she one day, as they lay together beneath the eaves after another long morning of little work, "why should we continue to make our lives so toilsome when there is no need? Why spoil the best days of our youth with the bleating of two goats that wake us at dawn? Better it were to give these creatures to our neighbor, who will gladly take them, and in return he will give us a beehive. We shall place the hive in a sunny corner behind the house. Bees, you see, do not require driving to the field nor watching by the hour. They fly forth on their errands and always find their way home, and they bring us honey without the bother of leading or coaxing." "You speak like a sensible woman," replied Harry, whose thoughts were never cleverer than when they promised him less work. "Let us put your notion to deed without delay. Honey tastes sweeter than goat's milk, keeps longer, and, best of all, it costs us less trouble." The neighbor, who was a man of simple commerce and liked the exchange of beasts for useful things, took the goats and gladly handed over a beehive. The bees began their work at dawn and labored until late twilight. They flew in and out, up and down, and before the year had waned, the hive was full and heavy with the most beautiful honey. In the autumn, when leaves fell and the wind took to sighing through the chimneys, Harry lifted from the hive a whole pitcher, filled to the brim with golden sweetness. They placed this pitcher upon a shelf fixed to the wall of their bedchamber, for they feared that some passing hand might be tempted by such treasure, or that mischievous mice would find their way to it. Trina, wary in her sloth as any sentry, brought an honest hazel stick and set it beside the bed, so that with little movement she might reach out and drive away any uninvited pilferers. Lazy Harry loved nothing more than to linger beneath the feathers until the sun had climbed high. "He who rises early," he would say with a yawn, "wastes his substance." One morning, while he still lay buried among the pillows in the full light of day, for he regarded noon as early and dawn as an affront, he peered over the quilt and said to his wife with a small voice of envy, "Women are fond of sweet things, and thou art always stealing tastes from the honey when I am absent. It would be better for our store if we exchanged it for a goose with a gosling, before thou eatest it all away." "But not so fast," answered Trina, who loved the idea of having something to care for as long as caring cost little else. How can we tend young geese when we have none to mind them? Am I to rise at all hours and fuss for their sake? I shall not spend my days away on useless tasks. Think you, Harry retorted, stretching one foot from under the cover, that a child would mind geese for us? Children nowadays do as pleaseth them. They fancy themselves wiser than their elders. Have you not heard of the lad who was sent to fetch the cow and chase 3 blackbirds instead? No, no. I say wait till we have a child who will do our bidding. Oh, cried Trina, her temper quick as a spark despite her inclination for ease. If that child will not obey, I will thrash him with more blows than I can count. She seized the stout hazel stick which stood by the bed, as if to practice the blow. Full of zeal, she raised her arm to strike the phantom disobedient one in the air. But mischance, which often attends the schemes of those who would have life made easier by another's task, took a hand. The stick slipped from her fingers, and with a heavy stroke smote the very pitcher upon the shelf above the bed. The pot struck the wall, toppled, and fell to the floor in 1,000 fragments. The rich honey, which had shone like a captured sun, streamed over the floorboards and ran like a small river under the bed. "There lie the goose and the little gosling," said lazy Harry, chuckling at the sweep of fate as though it were a jest brought to his door. "They need no looking after, but it is lucky the pitcher did not fall upon my head." He peered at the glitter left among the broken shards. Some of the honey still clung in a piece. With the appetite of a man who finds his comforts increased without labor, he stretched a hand and licked at the remainder. "Let us at least enjoy the remnants," he said with a careless gaiety. "After such a fright we may rest a little longer. What matters if we arise but an hour later? The day is long enough." "Aye," answered Trina, wiping a drop of honey with the corner of her apron and trying to make light of the mishap. "We shall come to the end of it in due time. Dost thou remember the snail that was bidden to a wedding and set out with all the best will, but arrived only at the christening? It fell over the garden fence and said, 'Speed does no good.' And so the two, who had sought to spare themselves work through bargains and bright ideas, found that ease has a way of tripling mischief, and that comfort won by avoidance sometimes loses itself in the very hour it hoped to keep. The little folks' presents. Once upon a time, in days when men still wandered far with staff and satchel, there journeyed together a tailor and a goldsmith. They were bound for distant towns, and as the evening sun sank low behind a row of solemn mountains, they grew weary of the stony road and longed for rest. Yet, all at once, a strange sound drifted across the twilight. Faint at first, like the trembling of a harp in the wind, then fuller, like flutes and pipes answering each other from unseen hills. The travelers stood still and listened. The music was unlike any they had heard, neither wholly of men nor wholly of heaven. It was wild, sweet, and beckoning. Their hearts leapt, and they forgot hunger, thirst, and tired feet. "Forward!" cried the goldsmith, whose back was bent with a hump, yet whose courage was straight as an oak. The tailor hesitated, for he was timid and small, but curiosity tugged him after his friend. So they pressed on until the round moon climbed above the ridges and poured silver light into the valley. Then they beheld a wondrous sight. Upon a hilltop stood a merry throng of little folk, men and women scarce higher than a child's knee, hand in hand, spinning and leaping in a great circle. Their faces shone with laughter, and their voices sang a tune more enchanting than the pipes of shepherds. At the center of the dance sat one who was taller than the rest, though still no higher than a man's waist. His coat was woven of many colors, red and green and golden threads, shimmering in the moonlight. From his chin flowed an iron-gray beard that covered his breast. He struck the ground with his staff in time to the song, and his eyes gleamed keen as flints. The tailor and the goldsmith stood rooted, astonished. The old man saw them and beckoned with a long finger. The circle of dancers opened at once, as though by magic. "Come in, strangers," the gesture seemed to say. The hunchback goldsmith stepped boldly first, for bravery often hides beneath crooked shapes. The tailor lingered behind, his knees trembling. But when he saw how light-hearted the dance was, he mastered his fear and slipped inside. The ring closed again, and the dance whirled faster. The little people bounded and sang, their feet scarcely touching the earth. The tailor gasped for breath, but the goldsmith laughed aloud. Meanwhile, the old man drew from his girdle a knife, long and sharp. He whetted it on a stone until it hissed. The two travelers turned pale, believing their last hour was come. Before they could flee, the old man seized the goldsmith, set him upon a stool, and, swift as lightning, shaved the hair clean from his head and beard. The same fate befell the trembling tailor. Yet, when the deed was done, their terror melted away. The old man clapped them both on the shoulders with a kindly nod, as though praising their obedience. Then he pointed towards a heap of black coals lying nearby. By signs he bade them fill their pockets. They obeyed, though they wondered what profit lay in carrying such burdens. When their pockets bulged, the circle opened once more, and they were thrust gently out upon the hillside. At that very moment, the monastery clock in the valley tolled midnight, and lo, the music ceased, the dancers vanished, the hill grew silent, and only the pale moon kept watch. The tailor and the goldsmith stumbled down into the valley and found shelter at an inn. Too weary to empty their pockets, they lay down upon straw beds, drawing their coats about them. Heavy sleep fell over them. Yet ere dawn broke, they awoke groaning, for their limbs were pressed as if by stones. Putting their hands into their pockets, they drew forth, not coals, but bright pieces of purest gold, heavy and glittering. Great was their joy, and greater still when they found their hair and beards grown again, thick and sound as before. Now they were rich men. The tailor, content with what Providence had given, said, "I shall be a master in my craft, marry my dear sweetheart, and live happily all my days. I need no more." But the goldsmith's greedy heart was not satisfied. Because he had filled his pockets deeper, he now had twice the treasure of the tailor, and yet he longed for more. "Let us go again tonight," he urged, "and fetch still greater riches. Why should we leave such bounty untaken?" But the tailor shook his head. "Enough is enough. A man who has bread should not grasp for another loaf while it is still warm in his hand. I will be content." Yet, to please his comrade, he lingered one more day. At nightfall, the goldsmith slung 2 great bags across his shoulders, for his greed was bottomless. Once more he climbed the moonlit hill and found the little folk dancing, the old man shaving his head as before, and the heap of coals lying dark at the side. Without hesitation, he crammed the bags till they could hold no more. His heart leapt at the thought of the mountains of gold he would pour forth come morning. He returned to the inn, lay down, and laughed to himself. "Even if the gold weighs heavy, gladly will I bear it," he whispered. With these sweet hopes he closed his eyes. But when the cock crowed and dawn crept into the room, the goldsmith sprang up, plunged his hands into the bags, and drew out black coals, nothing else. Again and again he groped, but there was no gleam of gold. "No matter," thought he, "the treasure I gained last night is still mine." He ran to the chest where he had hidden it, opened the lid, and woe upon woe, found only black coal within. His joy turned to ashes. He struck his brow with his dusty hand, and then felt his head bare and smooth, his beard gone forever. Worse still, where his hump had long bent his back, another now grew before him upon his chest, so that he was doubled with misery. Then he knew the punishment of greed. Bitterly he wept. The good tailor, awakened by his cries, came to him and said kindly, "Be not cast down, comrade. Thou hast journeyed with me, and I will not forsake thee now. Share what is mine, and live with me." Thus the tailor kept his word, and gave him shelter. Yet the poor goldsmith bore his 2 humps until the end of his days, hiding his bald head beneath a cap, a sad warning to all who would heap up treasure beyond their need. Hans married. Once upon a time, in a quiet village that lay between fields and forests, there lived a young peasant by the name of Hans. He was a simple fellow, neither clever nor foolish, but so mild of heart that he obeyed whatever was told him without question. Now Hans had an uncle, a sly man, who wished to see his nephew married to a wealthy bride, for he thought to better his own standing in the bargain. So, one day, when the snow lay heavy upon the roof and the wind rattled the shutters, the uncle took Hans and seated him firmly behind the stove. He heaped the fire high until the tiles grew hot and glowing, and then he set before Hans a steaming pot of milk and a great loaf of white bread. Into Hans's palm he pressed a newly minted farthing that shone as if it were a golden coin. "Now listen well, Hans," said the uncle, wagging his finger. "Hold that farthing tight in your hand, crumble the bread into the milk, and stir not a step from this spot until I return. If you do all this, fortune will smile upon you." "Yes," answered Hans with all obedience. "I shall do exactly as you say." And so he sat, with the coin clenched in his fist and the bread and milk before him, thinking no further thought. Then the uncle, who had dressed himself in a pair of patched and much worn trousers, strode off to the neighboring village, where lived the daughter of a rich peasant. Standing before her father, the old miser, the uncle bowed low and said, "Good sir, will you not give your daughter to my nephew Hans? You shall have an honest man for her, steady in his ways, and sensible enough to please any house." The miser narrowed his eyes. "And how does it stand with his fortune? Has he bread to break, or must my daughter chew crusts of poverty?" "Ah," said the wooer smoothly, "my nephew has everything one could wish, a snug hearth, a bit of money clinking in his hand, and bread in plenty. And as for land, why, he has as many patches as I myself." With that he slapped the many sewn-on pieces of cloth that covered his trousers. Yet in that countryside, everyone knew that the word patch also meant a plot of land, large or small. The miser, hearing this, thought Hans must indeed be well provided for. "Come, sir," said the uncle, "if you will but take the trouble to walk home with me, your eyes shall be convinced." Now the miser, greedy for gain and unwilling to miss such a chance, nodded at once. "If matters are as you say, then I will not stand in the way of the marriage." And thus the betrothal was made, and before long the bells rang, and the feast was set, and Hans had a bride without ever stirring from his stool behind the stove. On the day after the wedding, the young wife wished to see the fields and possessions that were promised her. Hans, who knew nothing of such things, took off his good Sunday coat and put on his smock frock, which was so patched that scarcely a bit of the old cloth remained. "I must not spoil my fine coat," said Hans in his gentle way. And off they went together. Whenever they came to a boundary line where one meadow ended and another began, Hans would stop, point with his finger, and slap a patch upon his frock. "That patch is mine," said he cheerfully, "and that one too, my dearest. Just look at it." He meant her to look at the stitches on his garment, but she, poor soul, stared wide-eyed at the great stretches of land and meadow, and thought all of it belonged to her husband. Thus she walked beside him in high spirits, dreaming of wealth, while Hans thought only of his coat. And so it was that the uncle's trick came true. Hans gained a wife, and the miser gave away his daughter, both believing themselves well matched. Now, if you should ask, were you yourself at the wedding? Why, yes, indeed I was there. My headdress was woven of fresh white snow, but when the sun peeped out, it melted away and left me bare. My coat was spun of cobwebs, fine as lace, but I brushed too near the thorns, and it was torn to tatters. My shoes were made of clear glass, and when I stumbled on a stone, they rang out, clink, and broke clean in two. And so ends the tale of Hans and the patches, where the fool was wiser than he knew, the miser was tricked by his own greed, and the bride learned too late that not every patch hides a field. The Devil and His Grandmother. In days long gone, when kings still raised great armies, and men bore sword and musket for scant reward, there was a war that consumed the land like a wildfire. The king had gathered countless soldiers under his banner, yet gave them wages so meager that a man could scarcely buy bread with them. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and bitterness filled their hearts. Among these soldiers were 3 companions, who often marched side by side. At last they said to one another, "What good is our service? We risk life and limb in battle, yet are rewarded with coins that jingle like mockery in our purses. If we remain, we starve. If we flee, we may yet find some fortune." So they made a secret covenant to desert the army. But one of them, the most cautious, whispered, "Brothers, if we are caught, the gallows will be our fate, and the crows will pick our bones. How shall we escape without being taken?" Another pointed to the wide fields of ripening corn and said, "See there, that golden sea of stalks. If we hide ourselves deep within it, none shall discover us. The army is forbidden to trample the corn, and by morning the regiments are to march away." So into the corn they crept, and the green walls closed about them. Yet fortune betrayed them, for the troops did not depart, but pitched their tents around the very field where the deserters lay. 2 days and 2 nights they crouched among the stalks, parched and faint, their stomachs clawing with hunger. Their lips cracked for want of water, and their heads swam with despair. To emerge meant certain death on the gallows, yet to remain meant slow perishing in silence. At last one groaned, "What have we gained by fleeing? We have deserted one death only to meet another, and more pitiful still." Then, as if the heavens themselves had heard, a shadow fell across the field. Out of the sky descended a mighty dragon, its scales glimmering like embers, its breath hot as a furnace. Fire flickered in its eyes, and the air quaked with the beating of its wings. The soldiers, trembling, pressed close together. The dragon fixed its gaze upon them and hissed, "Why cower here among the stalks, men of war?" They confessed their plight. "We are 3 soldiers who deserted, for the king's pay was too small to keep us alive. Now hunger drives us to death if we remain, and the gallows awaits us if we go forth." The dragon replied with a voice like thunder, "Serve me for 7 years, and I shall bear you through the army, so that no hand shall seize you." The men looked at one another, pale with dread. "We have no choice," they said, "for otherwise we perish here." So the dragon stretched forth its cruel talons, seized them, and bore them high through the air, far above tents and soldiers, until the world lay small beneath them. When at last they were set down on lonely ground, far from pursuit, the beast revealed its true nature. It was the devil himself. From its claw the devil handed them a whip, small and plain, yet gleaming with strange power. "Strike the ground with this whip, and gold shall spring forth in heaps, enough to make you lords, with horses and carriages and rich raiment. But mark me well, when 7 years are done, you are mine. Yet I am not unjust. If you can solve a riddle that I shall set, then you shall be free, and the whip shall remain yours." He opened before them a great black book, heavy as stone, and each was compelled to sign his name within. Then the devil unfurled his wings and vanished into the night. With the whip, the soldiers summoned piles of gold until the earth glittered. They bought fine apparel of velvet and silk, rode steeds shod with silver, and feasted in the grand halls of princes. Wherever they went, they lived in splendor, though they did no evil deed. Thus the years passed more swiftly than they dreamed. But as the 7th year drew near its end, 2 of the soldiers grew sick with dread. Their joy turned to ashes. They sat pale and sleepless, fearing the devil's claim. The 3rd, however, laughed lightly and said, "Brothers, grieve not. I have a keen wit, and I shall find the riddle's answer." One day, as they wandered in the fields, an old woman with a staff approached and asked why their faces were so sorrowful. They tried to dismiss her, but she urged, "Tell me your grief, for who knows if I may help." At last they confessed all, their bargain with the devil, the wealth he had granted, and the riddle yet to come. The crone nodded slowly. "If you are to be saved, one of you must journey deep into the forest. There you will find a rock shaped like a little hut. Within dwells one older than I, the devil's grandmother. She may help you, for though her kin is wicked, she has a softer heart." The 2 fearful soldiers shook their heads. "What use is this counsel? None can save us." But the 3rd, ever bold, took up the quest and strode into the forest. After long wandering, he found the stone hut and entered. Within sat a bent old woman, wrinkled as a winter apple. She asked whence he came and what he sought. He told her all, and because his manner pleased her, she took pity. Lifting a heavy slab from the floor, she revealed a dark cellar. "Hide yourself here. Stir not, nor breathe too loud. At midnight the devil will come, and I shall coax from him the riddle he has devised. He hides nothing from me, for I am his grandmother. Listen well, and when dawn comes, your life may yet be spared." So the soldier crouched in the cellar. At the stroke of 12, the devil swept in, demanding his supper. The grandmother set food and drink, and they feasted. In their talk, she asked, "What tidings, grandson? What souls have you ensnared this night?" The devil grinned wickedly. "I have 3 soldiers safe in my grasp. They cannot flee me. At the year's end, I shall bind them to hell with a riddle they will never answer." "What riddle is that?" asked the grandmother sweetly. "Ha," laughed the devil. "In the great North Sea lies a dead dogfish. That shall be their roast. The rib of a whale shall serve them as a silver spoon, and the hoof of an old horse shall be their wine glass. Never shall they unravel it." Soon he retired to sleep, and the grandmother lifted the stone to release the soldier. "Did you hear well?" "Indeed," he whispered. "I know enough." He returned swiftly to his companions and told them all. Their hearts grew light, and they cracked the whip to call forth gold until it spilled across the fields. When the 7 years were ended, the devil appeared with his book and said, "The time has come. What feast shall you eat in hell? Answer me if you can." The first soldier spoke. "In the North Sea lies a dead dogfish. That shall be our roast." The devil frowned darkly. The second said, "And the rib of a whale shall be our silver spoon." The devil's eyes flamed, and he growled, The third declared boldly, "And an old horse's hoof shall be our wine glass." At this the devil howled, a cry that split the air, and fled in fury. His power over them was broken, and he never returned. So the 3 soldiers kept the whip, summoned wealth as they desired, and lived out their days in peace and plenty, free of the devil's snare.